For Creamer Media's Polity, I'm Dimakatso Motau. Author and political activist Professor Raymond Suttner is in the studio to talk to us about the reasons behind the formation of the ANC. Raymond, welcome.
Thank you very much.
Why was the ANC formed and what did it aim to achieve?
I think the ANC must be understood, or it was called the South African Native National Congress when it was formed in 1912. We must understand it against the history of South Africa with the conquest of all independent African peoples, which started from the first settlement in 1652, but was particularly strong in the 19th century with 100 years of warfare in the Eastern Cape, battles in Sekhukhune, what is now Sekhukhune land, against the Zulu in Isandlwana, against the Sotho, against the Venda under the grandfather of Mpepu, who was a Bantustan leader. His grandfather had led resistance. So there's a whole lot of forms of resistance that were defeated. Secondly, there was a missionary influence, which I think gave whatever the negative aspects of Christianity may have been in the eyes of some people. Christianity gave people a sense of all people being humans, all people being part of God's creation. And consequently, this was also a motivating factor which drew people into an emancipatory idea, an idea that they didn't have to be the dogs of the white person. In the late 1880s, a number of political organizations and educational and journalistic organizations were formed, and these were the prelude to the ANC. But the main things that really got people worried were the end of the Anglo-Boer War, the South African War, the Treaty of Vereniging, where all the previous colonies were given self-government, that is, rights over black people. This was really a prelude to union, where the British handed power over the whole of South Africa to the whites. And this is the reason why the SANNC was formed.
People sometimes suggest that the early ANC went cap in hand to beg for concessions. Some people also suggest that they mimicked their masters by wearing top hats and similar formal clothing. Generally, there is a tendency to ridicule them. What is your view on this?
You know, it's very easy to say they were obsequious, look at the way they dressed. But we have to understand that one period of struggle was over, what one poet called the time of the spear. And they had to operate on a terrain where the conventions required that they should dress in a particular way. And there's an art critic, John Berger, who claims that the suit was invented as the attire of the ruling class in Britain. So in a sense, when you wear the attire of your ruler, you may be interpreted as making a claim, which they were, to being equal subjects under the crown. So I think some of their protestations, the way they did it, must be understood as adapting, but even making a claim.
Was it not necessary for the ANC Youth League to be forced to wake them up and make the organization effective?
You see, very often people think that history operates with some people moving very slowly and then suddenly there is a rupture. Now, I understand history as operating with continuities and with ruptures. In the whole history of the ANC, there were some people who didn't go wearing suits and things like this. In the 1920s, there was the Industrial and Commercial Union, which quickly got 100,000 members, and they spread like a wildfire in the rural areas. So it was possible to have mass struggle. But we cannot say that it was undesirable for people to send deputations to Britain, to have petitions. The question in politics is, when has something run its course? And I think the leaders of the ANC were not ready to abandon what they had been doing when it had really been shown to be fruitless. And before the Youth League, they started to rebuild the ANC from about the mid-30s. Reverend Khalata went on a union-wide tour to see the state of the organization. It took him 3 years to complete. Now this gives one an idea of the conditions under which they worked. And when Dr. Xuma became ANC president, he and Khalata built branches. Now without these structures, the ANC Youth League would not have been able to implement their ideas. Those radical ideas which transformed the ANC required structures. Also, Dr. Xuma, long before the ANC was a non-racial organization, he had a pact with the Indian Congresses between himself and Dr. Naika, Dr. Naika of the Indian Congress and Dr. Dadu. It's known as the Doctors' Pact in 1949, and they agreed to cooperate. So you had this, at that stage, the Youth League was not prepared to work with non-Africans and communists. So that while the Youth League, I think the importance of the Youth League must not be underestimated. You have Anton Lembede, Oliver Tambo, Walter Sisulu, A.P. Mda, Nelson Mandela, declaring for the first time South Africa is a black man's country. And I think that was part of a revolutionary discourse and was very important for the development of South Africa. But I think we must see them as building on what went before. Even the earliest ANC deputations had an element of subversion, because what they were saying is, Your Majesty, help us. And when they say help us, they're actually undermining the union government. Moroka and Sisulu wrote letters to the Prime Minister informing them in 1952 that if they didn't repeal certain laws by a certain date, they would embark on defiance of these unjust laws.